Yep, so I think we're live on Facebook, so it should be good now.
Okay.
Great.
Am I clearly audible?
Yep, you're audible. So whenever you're ready, we'll start round one.
Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Thank you, panel, that we are supporting this, that this trend in progressive discourse. That what is the trends in progressive discourse? That is the progressive discourse varies in country to country or society to society. This progressive discourse is against the norms of the society. There is very harm for the society or the individual rights of a person that having his consent that he can do the things that doesn't harm the society or any other person of the society. First of all, we are gonna principle that anyone can do anything when it doesn't harm anyone. So the thing is that even if you can do in your within your consent that doesn't harm any person or any society and doesn't give any shit, doesn't it allow this disallow the train of progressive discourses. This progressive discourses, likely then in Saudi Arabia, the norms was girls and girls cannot be drive or girls cannot be hang out in other places, and this progressive norm is right now this women can drive in those that country. That we believe that if, because of the progressive discourses, there are many reformation will be happening in the society, and this we should support this progressive discourses for the betterment of our society or betterment of our culture. Why we think that this how it will help this for the society. First of all, this progressive discourses break down the societal norms. How it can break down that many norms have been derivatives have been cultivated, derivatives have been practices from thousands of years or many years because of this previous our previous person or our previous society or society is maintaining this discourses from many years, so that we have to continue this likely. This women are in third world country or in conservative world, they don't allow to go out of the house, or they don't allow to work, or they don't allow to equal rights of men. This progressive norms existence in a developed third world country was a very conservative country. So this progressive discourse to help breaking down this type of norms, and that people can come and say that people can come and say against us this regressive norms and other things. And second down is this breaking down this taboo of your society norms. That's how it's helped. This breaking down taboo is like whenever in this very conservative Muslim rules that you can this very conservative Muslims or Hindus rules was that you cannot eat from any others or any Muslims family, and there is a very regressive norms of the society, or thus whenever whenever girls are pregnant, they have to maintain some norms, likely this like you cannot go out at night, you cannot walk without giving urna in your head, and others norms. Thus a taboo existed in the society. The societal norms is this breaking down this kind of taboo norms and reform is society. And second thing is this why the society running norms is made. Society running norms made by the majority of the society first of all, and it's dominates dominates this others minor people, or it's the society is structured, it's defined the class division very muchly, and that's why this minor people get very harmed from this society norms, like this LGBTQ don't allow in your society, and they cannot say that I am this LGBTQ, and they cannot do their they cannot do anything. They had to hide themselves from the society because this your regressive norm doesn't support this, and your society does not support this because of your societal norms, and this person cannot run this cannot show his own beliefs and cannot practice his own beliefs in your in this in your current status quo. So we think that this minority oppression or societal norms that that's grown by this majority of your society and does not support this minor group of your society, and it can be happening in our house of sales, our house of side, that this because of this idea of society, this progressive discourses, this people can say about themselves or can do whatever they want that doesn't harm anyone. And second is why this society being more civilized in day by day because of progressive minded. Thing is this, whenever this you are in we support progressive discourses because there are many past things in society that have been happened because of progressive discourses. Likely whenever in a previous times there is many division or division or hated for this other religious perspective, like whenever this in the time of crusade that you have to kill Muslims or other things is because of religious and other occurrences and happened, that the societal discourses with the harmony of the society comes, and the reform of society happened. So we believe that if we support the society these progressive discourses, this harmony of society will be more in our house. Likely that this conservative this conservative sense of Muslims, that women cannot go in schools, or they cannot work with this very conservative things, is they cannot work with a male person, or they cannot work or hang out with this male. This progressive discourses allow this type of things in your society that help to reform your society, or that because of this your society being more civilized. And the thing is the ideology that come new and new because of the societal discourses, that doesn't happen if you don't support the society this progressive discourses. How new idea has been happen, these ideas have been comes, like this current status quo, we are doing many things that we didn't did in past. And the thing is, whenever you see in this history that likely many philosopher or many person have been comes and worked with those new ideology of the society that break down the societal norms. So if you don't allow progressive discourses, that if you why we support this progressive discourses, because this new ideology will become again and again, and that will reform your society and that will help your person. And the last thing is why individual right to do anything is more important than that don't harm any person. That we believe that individual rights to do same things with the consent is more important to society for his principles first of all.
Sorry.
And second thing is to things to do for the society and other things that don't harm us.
That's
Thank
time.
you. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to thank the speaker and invite the first negative speaker to open the case for the negative team.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes, I'm just going to connect your phones. Again, am I audible? Sorry.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, great. Starting in 3, 2, 1. It is hard to be a woman in porn that is forced to make private parts of her life so public that her own family would rather she not live in the house. It is also painful for a poor person to foot hospital bills from an injury that was caused to them in a survival show, just because they weren't able to understand that they were consenting to that through the 12-page long waiver that they had to sign without having a lawyer present. On negative, we think consent can never truly be generalized, which is why we would rather it not be discussed at all. I want to make one thing clear about Affirmative's case so far. I think their burden, they've like vastly, significantly misread the burdens in this motion, because I think so far their biggest problem is that they would rather have progressive discourse than not have it at all. I mean, I think on negative, we would want to support progressive discourse. 2, I think this debate is particularly about about the ways in which we would approach consent in particular industries in this progressive discourse. Three pieces of framing then from negative. Firstly, I think the burden on Affirmative in this debate is particularly to defend conversation in progressive discourse about things like pornography, about things like violent, like survival shows, etc., by assuming and believing that everybody in those games or in the industry are actively participants and actively have consented to that industry. I think secondly, our counterfactual on opposition is just that we would support production houses, we would support shows, etc., that have good working conditions, as opposed to like evaluating whether there was fair consent when people opted into that show. This could look like perhaps pornography houses that have women directors, that have women producers, etc. Pornography houses that have great working conditions and great minimum wages that they pay to individuals, living conditions that could look like giving people like a good place to shoot their videos, etc. I think this is true. Like, I think our counterfactual is likely to be more palatable for 2 reasons. Number one, it is easier for people to understand how bad living conditions are, like because they recognize that living conditions can be fairly evaluated by virtue of like how much you're being paid, by virtue of the conditions of like your environment, etc., as opposed to consent that requires vast amounts of nuances to evaluate fairly. But I think the second thing that's true is that you can just use metrics that you use for other industries, such as like the technology industry, to decide whether minimum wage is being fair or not. I want to make it clear, again, in second speech, Affirmative cannot co-opt the idea of living conditions, because this debate most definitely has to be a trade-off for 2 reasons. Number one, I just think in general media time is limited, so the ways in which progressive discourse have to use that limited media time has to either be defending consent or either be talking about living conditions. But I think secondly, you can't have a movement that in general is splintered. You can't have a movement that to a degree says consent has existed, which is why people have consented to the living conditions as well, and then also say living conditions are bad, which is to say that they will have to defend a splintered movement, which in general would not be defending a movement at all. 3 things then in this speech. Firstly, why we principally think that there isn't a lot of consent in situations like this. Secondly, why the industry is likely to become better on our side of the house. And thirdly, why we lower the bar of consent at the point at which you assume that all participants have been consenting. Why do we think principally there hasn't been a lot of consent? 3 ways in which I'm going to make this argument. The first is to tell you that there is some criteria of consent that doesn't get that isn't met when you have things like pornography. 2 reasons why we think that. Number one, I think consent is obviously always based on the revocability of that consent, i.e., insofar as you cannot withdraw consent retrospectively, because your production house isn't likely to remove a video just because you don't like it being up anymore. We think that consent can't fairly be evaluated, because you you can never actively revoke it. But I think the second thing that's true is that you don't have full information to be able to consent to things like this in the first place. This is true for two reasons. Number one, I think that because very few people opt into this industry in the first place, you don't have symmetric obligation, like you don't have symmetric ability like you do in other industries to talk to people that have already opted into the system and understand what it's like in living conditions for them, which is to say that you never have full information symmetry to consent in the first place. But I think the second thing that's true is that you don't obviously understand the repercussions of your action, i.e. that you're going to become so public that probably people halfway across the world will recognize you and will also know like incredibly private parts of your life. Insofar as you haven't consented to it before, you will never know full information to be able to do that consent now. Why do you think? The second thing I want to make clear under this argument is to show you that there's a truth value of non-consent. This is true for two reasons. I think number one, a lot of the ways in which participants consent are that they're made to like sign waivers, or they're made to sign like long agreements that they don't particularly understand. They're also told in these agreements that they explicitly never say that they've never consented, because that would reflect badly on these production houses, which is to say that they never understand that they're consenting in the first place. But I think secondly, it's just a lack of alternatives for a lot of these individuals. Like you would rather participate in a survival show and have a chance of winning money to put food on the table for your family rather than have them all starve, which is to say that you have never like truly consented to those conditions in the first place. Even if opposition, like government, wants to prove in this debate that they have like that a vast majority of people have consented, we think that we should still not have this as a trend in progressive discourse for two reasons. Number one, I think you just in general can't generalize consent. Like individuals should have their own ability to decide whether it's consented or not. And the point at which you think all participants have consented, you're obviously generalizing consent for the people that have not consented. But I think secondly, just likely to be a survivorship bias, which is to say that because you believe that a lot of people have consented, only the people that have consented are platform, and therefore you're likely to suppress people that haven't consented. The preemptive weighing for this argument is simple. It's two things. Number one, we show you that there's a certainty of consent that can never exist on affirmative. But number two, the outcomes of consenting hurt participants irreversibly. Insofar you can't change that, a government can never win this debate. Why do we think industry becomes better on our side of the house? There are four ways in which I'm going to make this argument. The first is to just say that I think the bar for making an industry good is often just that consent has to exist in the first place. Insofar as that's the only bar, like you probably aren't likely to look at, like you probably aren't likely to push for further reform, because all you would push for is that participants consent in the first place. Insofar as we've shown you that consent can never exist, our side is the only side that can push for things like minimum wages, that can push for things like better living conditions. So a priori, we already get some amount of like reform in these industries. But I think the second thing that's true is that the onus changes from participants to production houses themselves, because on affirmative, it's likely to be the participant didn't consent and therefore this video didn't come out right, which is why they want to revoke that consent in the first place. Whereas on our side of the house, the production houses now have the onus to make living conditions better so that participants want to be in that industry in the first place. The incentive for like making these houses better are twofold. I think number one, obviously you don't want to be banned as a pornography house, which means you want more support. If you think you can get this from a progressive discourse, you are likely to then be happy about that. But I think secondly, just getting more support allows you to lobby for regulations like not having pirating for your video, etc., which is why you want the support from the progressive movement in the first place. The third thing I want to make clear about this under this argument is that people can no longer be apathetic to the horrors that go on in these industries. This is particularly true because on government, there's a dissonance of them believing that everybody has consented. So even if they see horrible living conditions, they don't really want to protest against it because they think that participants know what they're doing. I think on our side of the house, you can no longer be apathetic because you recognize that living conditions are the only metric to evaluate whether a person should be in an industry or not. So you're more likely to want to do things like donate to charities, donate to the movement in general, push for better reform for these industries, etc. Lastly, I think your ability to get change is incredibly bad on affirmative, particularly because you're seen as a splintered movement, like I've told you in my characterization, which is to say that you can never truly know what the movement is standing for, and therefore you are less likely to get buy-in for that movement. The weighing for this argument is simple. It's analytically prior to government, because at least we get better living conditions, and we show you that non-consent makes living conditions in and of itself bad. So they have to defend two harms than on affirmative. Why do we lower the bar of consent? Two things, right? Number one, I think more people opt in believing that consent is always going to be valued in that industry, which is to say that they never really understand what they're opting into in the first place. But the second thing that is true is that people that don't consent are likely to be suppressed for two reasons. One, they're ostracized because they haven't consented, but two, they place a burden on themselves to consent because everyone around them is consenting. For all these reasons, super happy to oppose.
Excellent. I'd like to thank the speaker and welcome the second affirmative speaker to continue the case for the affirmative team.
Am I audible? Okay, starting within few seconds. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's talk about the what opposition said. First of all, they have to understand that it was never a media debate. Rather, it was a totally principal ground debate, which was over the overall situation, and the pornography industry was just an example. So, first of all, let me clarify debate and what the affirmative team are trying to say. First of all, we are trying to say that in this world, you have to look at every culture or every society or differences between them, and also we have to focus on different ideologies and also the egocentric behavior of different cultures or different country people. So for the thing, first of all, let me rebut the whole cases of the opposition party. First of all, they talked about that. In the media industry, like the shows like Big Boss and all, or shows or pornography, someone's private life will be public. First of all, they are consented, and also it's not all. It was never a debate that if the process is right or wrong. It was the debate of the debate on the principal ground that we were talking about, that if someone consented that his or her life will be public, then they can choose whatever he or she wants. So it's not the debate that if it is good or bad to be someone to become someone's life private or public. It's all about the consent they are giving. Secondly, if someone like join these types of shows like Roadies, Big Boss or something like that, or and also in the pornography industry, the videos cannot be down, which is not true. First of all, in recent days, this whole mechanism was reconstructed, and also if someone give the if someone wants to like move out from these types of industry, they can take down their videos and so on. Then again, let's come to our case. So first of all, we were not talking only about the media industry. We were talking about the whole scenario, and the motion was that that we support this trend in progressive discourse, where we defend behaviors and norms which was based on consent. So suppose my friend is alcoholic, or he has his family support and so on, and also where it's not illegal, and I don't like alcohol and all. So it's not about I will stop him to I'll just stop him to in his work or her work. It's all about the respecting others choices, and also in this whole world, we are not like accepting others choices, and we always try to be egocentric, and also we try to we try to give them our own ideologies, and we believe that everyone should follow our ideology. And that's why the in this whole world the clashes are being arised, and also the world has become massacred. Secondly, we talked about that why there are lots of negative norms which should be abolished by this norm which is based on consent. First of all, we talked about that we should these types we talked about that progressive discourse ensure proper human rights, such as gender equality or color equality, and stopping racism, etc. So affirmative first speaker said, in Saudi Arabia we can see a revolution, in Middle East we can see a revolution, in every country we can see that, in the whole world we can see that these types of progressive discourses, when these types of progressive discourses are made, a big changes or big positive changes are coming to that society, and it varies from culture to culture and society to society. Like suppose in my culture, like women are not allowed to go outside without hijab. So in my culture, going out without hijab going outside is also a progressive discourse, and these types of discourses are making sure a proper human rights, and also making sure the freedom a human needs, or a freedom a human demands, because it's his or her choice, and it's also there about their consent. And then again, we also talked about that these types of progressive discourses makes us more civilized, because it teaches us to respect someone's choices, and also to ensure a proper balance in our society. Like it creates a proper harmony to between culture and between religion, and also it makes sure that different types of different cultured people are living in the same country, or different types of religious people are living in the same country with harmony and with peace. So we also can see that when these types of progressive discourse are suppressed, and also are not arising, there are always clashes, and also these types of egocentric behavior to the egocentric behavior to oppress others. So then again, we also talked about reducing discrimination. We talked about the gender equality and etc. And also we also talked about maintaining societal balance, like as we have said that these types of societal balance, these types of progressive discourse lets us keeps us ensures the societal harmony between culture to culture, and also between religion to religion. And also progressive discourse also, like in recent days we can see that progressive discourse gives us the opportunity to talk against oppressions, such as a country leader or an oppressive leader, or when an oppressive leader is trying to oppress the whole nation, by putting some laws and etc., or some like conservative ideas, then we can also talk against that government or against that leader with these progressive discourses, like when the French Revolution was arised, we can see that Rousseau and Voltaire also spread these types of progressive discourses to the people, and there was a big revolution made. Okay. Lastly, we also talked about that these types of progressive discourses lets us to think freely, and also without bindings, and it gives us it helps us to create new ideologies to help make our society a better place. Okay. Lastly, I want to say that that we support this trend in progressive discourse, because it can change a whole country, and it can change the whole world. Thank you.
Excellent. I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech, and welcome the second negative speaker to continue the case for the negative team. Can't quite hear you.
We have finished.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the second negative.
Is this better?
Yeah, that's much better.
Sorry. All right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. There are two reasons why the side on affirmative loses the debate today. The first is just burden misplacement, right? We already flag in Aayana why they've misread the burdens of the motion. This isn't about whether progressive discourse is good or bad. There is a context slide to this motion, which is specifically about practices, the ways in which progressive discourse is framed, right? Which is to say, when we're defending things like pornography in progressive discourse, do we adopt the frame that these are things to which people consent to, or rather do we adopt a frame which Aayana tells you in first speech, just with regards to we should support specific parts of these like industries because they provide good working conditions and hence these choices are valid, right? They just miss the burdens of the motion that way. But secondly, they also lose a non-engagement, right? There's literally no response to the content you hear from Aayana with regards to why we're better able to get change within the industry and why this sort of consent isn't valid. So I think the side on affirmative is already losing the debate, right? But I'm going to be engaging with them on largely two fronts of the round. The first is the validity of framing the discourse in this manner, and secondly is the ways in which you can get change within the like these sorts of practices, right? The first is the validity of framing this in the manner, right? They make a few claims here. The first claim they make is that to the extent to which people have consented, you should be fine with that, right? The first thing I want to flag there is absolutely assertive at the end of two speeches. They never give you any structural reasons as to why we should assume that this consent is universal and is one that's taken in a proper manner, right? For affirmative arguments to be true, you need to believe that like you have people explaining the true extent of the things that are going to be happening to them, and then like taking in valid questions from these individuals, answering those questions, and then assuming this consent, rather than what Aayana tells you, which is the norm in these industries. You just give them like a 12-pager and be like, sign this thing. This is like if you want to do this role or not, right? Which is why I just don't think they do the legwork there, right? But even if they do the legwork, I just want to note, I think the irreversibility harms that Aayana talks about are crucial in terms of weighing these things, right? Even if we assume that all people consent to this when the thing is happening, when the porno is being filmed or whatever, I think to the extent to which you want to retrospectively revoke the consent after these things have gone out, when you want to take down the video, etc., I think those harms are much worse and much irreversible. The response they have to this is just to say that, oh, people can take these videos down, but this argument assumes leverage on part of these individuals, right? Which is to say that it assumes the fact that these people who are desperate for work right now, who don't have who don't have stable living, who are just starting to make their careers or etc., do have the ability to go up against production houses which are well established, which often have like a multiplicity of supply, right? They can just choose from another individual if you make a huge fuss out of it, which is why I don't think they prove that you can take these things down, right? But the next ways in which they try to defend the validity is to say that there is no third-party harm that happens, which is why you should be fine with this sort of choice, right? I think there are a couple of problems with this argument, right? The first is just that there is a third-party harm that does end up happening, right? Which is to say that aspiring people who want to enter these industries, such as like probably like porn, etc., often end up facing survivorship bias, which is to say when you see all videos that come with a disclaimer that says that all participants to this have consented, you as someone who wants to enter the industry assume that no matter who you are, like you're going to be your consent is going to be taken in a fair manner for all of these sorts of things, right? The third party harm with this is that to the extent to which affirmative can't guarantee to you that consent will be taken in a fair way in every single production house, etc., it is a harm for aspiring individuals because they may enter into production houses that don't take their consent fairly or make them do things they're not extremely comfortable with, and these individuals don't have ability to opt out later then, and that's why then you change their perceptions, which is a clear third party harm. The second third party harm that does end up happening is that in terms of consumers as well, right? I think the things you see on the screen are also things that affect your perceptions or like perceptions or attitudes regarding these things, right? For example, for things like porn, these are things that directly tie like these like attitudes with regards to what you watch when you see porn are actively things that like spill over into how you perceive your sex life to be, right? To the extent to which you see things that are being like actively consented to on the screen, you would probably want those things in your real life as well. To the extent to which someone is not comfortable doing those sorts of things, you think that those people are deviants from the norm, right? These people aren't aren't consenting to things that where other people are consenting to, that's a tangible third party harm. But also in terms of like the things that Aayana describes here, in terms of like survival, like things, etc. Right? To the extent to which like people think these are fine things to do, they might try these out on their own and like, I don't know, end up dying or something like that. So there's a tangible third party harm. They can't defend that on affirmative. But the final thing they say is that we should respect choices, and which is why I think this is fine to frame the discourse in this manner, right? So I think that the first the thing I want to flag here is that there are alternative avenues to respecting choices. To the extent to which their claim is that there are certain people who opt into this and fully consent into it, we should frame the discourse in this manner. But I would posit that if it is a case that you want to talk about, let's say, porn stars who have actively made this choice and actively consent to these sorts of things, those people can just like consent to it regardless of the progressive discourse being that way or not, right? You aren't tangibly harmed when the progressive discourse isn't framed in a manner which talks about specifically your consent, because you can consent regardless. But the more tangible thing for which you need a progressive discourse is for talking about things like material conditions or living conditions. This is specifically because of a few reasons, right? One is because you exclusively as a progressive movement have the like lobbying power, to talk about things such as wages, etc. But two, it is a more tangible thing where you can get change, right? You can look at the like the minimum wages in other industries. You can look at the benefits that are provided to other sort of employees. You can benchmark those things and like look at the fact that this industry is actually pretty exploitative and terrible, right? You have the ability to bring out these sorts of changes, which means if the argument on their side is that we should respect choices, we are better able to respect choices on our side because we're able to specifically flag those parts of the choice which are neglected on their side, for which you need the progressive movement. The conclusion of all of this, that we've like our arguments with regards to why this consent is probably not going to be taken fairly still stands as they are, but we've responded to all the claims they made with regards to why this consent is valuable, which is why we're winning the first clash clearly, right? But on the second clash of where you're able to get better change within these industries, right? Their last claim is just that like you're better able to talk about oppressive practices, the point at which you frame it around consent. Like one, like this is assertive. Like I literally do not know why this is true, especially given our analysis of why these individuals do not have leverage, right? But I'm going to give you a few impacts with regards to why when you frame the discourse around more like around the counterfactual, you get better change within industries, right? There's few for a few reasons. One, the things we talk about are more tangible. What this often means is that you can make a case, you as an individual within these industries can make a case for why your salary or your benefits are lower compared to like other industries, etc. This is why you're better able to bargain for these sorts of things, as opposed to consent, which like in most average people's minds is like a very, very intangible thing that you don't fully understand the nuances of, which means that you don't get enough people rallying behind you, which is why it is hard for you to prove a case with regards to why things are exploitative, right? But secondly, I would note, and I think we're the only side that is able to have organic checks and balances within the sorts of industries and norms that we're talking about. This is true for a few reasons, right? This is true first because we're the only side that creates an active incentives for production houses to do better. You should say if you're a shady, low revenue like production house, which isn't like getting a lot of money, etc., you know that on side affirmative, the only thing you need to do is just get these forms signed so that you seem like a legit production house. On our side, there's a specific incentive. You need to provide better living conditions, otherwise you're going to be subject to some sort of like backlash from the progressive discourse, etc. But secondly, right, I think on our side we incentivize lesser collaborations with bad firms, etc. If there's a production house that doesn't provide good conditions, you as a better production house are less likely to collaborate with them and give them more media time on air time, because you know that you will face backlash as a result of something like that. But three, like fewer like individuals want to come into these like shady production houses because they now know that these are places that don't provide them good revenue, etc., etc. All of this can happen only when you frame the discourse around more material things as opposed to consent, which they can't win the debate on. But lastly, I just want to preempt a couple of things, right? Even if like let's say third affirmative wants to come and argue that when you frame the discourse around more material things, people can do terrible things on the guise of providing you good material conditions. If that's the response they want to make, a couple of responses to that, right? The first is that I think like consent is symmetrical on both sides then anyway. But secondly, I just want to flag to the extent to which this isn't framed from the perspective of like your consent, your ability to leave is much better, right? The extent to which there are terrible practices happening, you can leave those things much better, which is why we empower greater agency on our side. For all those reasons, negate.
I'd like to thank the speaker and welcome the third affirmative speaker to conclude the substantive part of the affirmative team's case.
Starting in few seconds. Starting in few seconds. Am I audible? Yes. Starting in 3, 2, 1. That to support this trend in progressive discourse, we are posing this motion by some standpoints we have shown you clearly. First of all, the consent is also social norms, and we want to abolish the negative norms by using these norms as a weapon. Number two, break down norms and what we get from it. By using these norms of consent, we want to show that we get the freedom of think, freedom of talk, freedom of human rights, and so on. We can do, and we can fly our wings. Number two, we have shown that why we need progressive discourse itself. We need progressive discourse itself to be more civilized and to be more human. How it can happen? We can see that when the social and cultural society or community arise, then there creates a dominating something that like some chairs want to oppress the others and the lower cases intention and mentality, and to want to divert their mentality to their thinking. Number four is to maintain social balance. We need progressive discourse. How it can be maintained? It can be maintained by a way that when we have the right and consent to do anything, we can achieve anything. But when we have not the right or have not the consent to do or way to do, then we cannot do anything. Just like the example you are using here, like pornography. And basically, I think you are inserting this debate in pornography, which is used an example here only. You have to realize that. But we have talked about consent to show you that how this consent can be used to remove pornography when the porn stars or the others don't want to, and who doesn't want to see, they don't see, who doesn't want to do, they don't do. Here is a matters arise that some people are forced to do. Here also we need this type of consent, because when we force, there is a power using here, but who is oppressed here and who is like liable to do that or forced to do that, his consent doesn't count here. And this consent we need. When we will practice this type of consent, we will practice this consent practice, then they won't be forced and they won't be judged somehow. And who want to do this professionally, then they will do it by their consent. And who I am or you to disturb their consent? That is not the question, I think. Then my opponents negative, they have shows as logic, like media industry, how they control our norms and control our consent. Media industry have also right to express their express their emotion, their feelings, their consent. And we are also human beings. We have this consent to accept it or not to accept it. You have to understand it boldly. Number two, you have talked about that private life will be public by throwing this norms. But who wants to public his private life? Who are you to judge him, or who are you to just not getting support him? You cannot just you just show your consent and they will just do their consent. It's the society, or it's the perception we want to show in this debate. Number three, you have told about the suppressing and appraising methods, that in some cases, some shows, or some here, there are some like there's like some contract, someone cannot be get out from there, or something else like matter. But you need to know that when a porn stars just film their work, then their lawyer also present there, and it's when it goes to officially, it becomes unofficially, and they do it officially. So there is nothing is about that they are not proceeding their consent and so on. And we are basically want to show that consent is important to get the human right to remove social illogical norms, which is a burden to some in some cases, like the religious viewpoints, like the domination of black and white matter, like the domination of capitalist or socialist, like the domination of parenting, like the domination of domination of racism, and etc. We can call about, we have set an example to you that where there is no right of a human, whereas there is no right of a human to live freely. Here you can set an example of Socrates. Do you remember how Socrates died? He couldn't just establish his consent and his morality and his thought. That's why they just killed him by poisoning. But just imagine that when if Socrates is not killed, then he will do better and provide more things and provide more supportings to us. Then you have said that production house. Said about production house. Here we can rebut it any time to by saying that if anyone go production house with consent, it's okay. It's still progressive discourse. Here still progressive discourse is better. That also reform the production house, that consent makes one loyal to his work and loyal to his proportion. We can talk about here #MeToo movement is also a progressive discourse. If we just judge like that, social progressive discourse will remove social imbalance or so far, we cannot just get this #MeToo movement and so on. Okay, for these cases we want to say that we support that with this trend in progressive discourse. Thank you.
I thank the speaker and welcome the third negative speaker to conclude the substantive case for the negative team.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep.
Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. In a society where people are increasingly apathetic towards harms other people face, putting the wheel of consent as a justification to the worst things which go on in an industry and giving people the ability to justify shittier and shittier outcomes on the basis of a wheel of consent is the worst practice you can do in terms of regulating these industries. And hence we beg you to negate this motion, right? I'll be talking about two frames in the speech. First, on where does the industry have better improvements, and second on principle. But before that, just one piece of engagement with a whip. I think the idea on whip was that, look, we will voice out instances of forced consent and that should give us good outcomes. I have three responses to it. First, I think we have given you already enough reasons as to tell you why there is pressure from narrative inside the industry and outside the industry for people to be forced to consent anyway, and for this consent to not be showcased because the general norm is that people are consenting. But the second thing is that even if this forced consent comes out in public, this will be looked at as a one-off scenario and people will assume that the general norm is consent and this is probably some individual isolated instances which you don't really have to care about. But the third thing to say is that like even the production houses and people in the industry will always be able to oppose this one voice is saying that I was forced to consent with some other person who was a credible source of truth saying that, look, I meaningfully consented. So they have the ability to oppose that out. The outcome of this response is simple, is that even at the best case at affirmative, like showing forced consent and publicly showing forced consent of people in public will never be able to get any meaningful change at a point at which I've told you three reasons why it will not, right? But before I get into my framing, I just want to flag, I think affirmative case is largely about proving why progressive discourse is good, but I think this debate is rather aimed to tell you how this progressive discourse should strategize its ability to get certain outcomes, right? That being said, on the first thing, on where do we bring better improvements in the industry, I think this is the primary clash in this debate, given to the extent that this is a debate about how you shape a progressive discourse, and I would assume that the end goal of a progressive discourse is to get change to certain amount of capitals available at their disposal. Given that is true, I think affirmative doesn't really have a clear mechanism here, but I think their case somewhere hints at saying that, look, we want to respect these choices of individuals who get into the industry, and then I think as a result of this, we assume that they want to give, like, individualize the conversations around consent and like recognize that consent is unique to individuals or something like that, right? But I think that there are just two problems with that line of argumentation as well. First, I think like the respect to individuals in this industry is very symmetric, right? Which is to say that even if you give people on our side like things like higher wages and better living conditions, you will get the same amount of like respect by people in society, etc., right? But I think the second thing on just like respecting these choices or these individuals is that on our side of the house, we actually are able to respect these people more because we think we are able to better shape consumer perception for the better, in terms of we take away the ease of ignorance from these people and we make them understand problems better. So just two pieces of weighing then on like improvements in the industry. First, on probability of change. I think even if lobbying for respecting of choices in this debate is unique to only affirmative, which I think it is not, at our even at our worst, I'm unsure as to how like they're able to change all the problems with such industry, right? With such industry in terms of whatever we have flagged out to you. But I think comparatively, we give you incentive structures on two levels on how our change is more likely to occur. I think the first level was just on like how we take away consumer apathy, and on the second, and how we have industry incentives in terms of these industries wanting good regulation for non-piracy things, or good regulations, or like just lifting of bans in a lot of conservative countries. So I think we proved to you a higher probability of change than what affirmative can ever do. But the second bit of weighing on this is just simply on scale. I think on their side, at best, conversations will place the onus on these individual actors to consent, given that there's a norm of consent in society. Like, which is to say that at best, they give some individuals the ability to consent better, and look at their own work from an individual lens, and they rely rely then as a result a lot on how individuals look at this consent. But I think on a comparative, our change is just on a very large scale on the level of an whole industry, and we are obviously going to benefit more and more people. So just by weighing the scale of people who get benefits on either side of the house, I think we just get a lot of benefits. Like second thing then, and I think this is what they majority push in their case, which is just on principle. I think the affirmative principle is that look, people should be allowed to consent to whatever happens to them, which means that they want to argue that people should be given autonomy to the fullest extent, right? First, I think just a principle in general has less value in this debate, to the extent that this is about a discourse and getting like probably more pragmatic changes. But I think even on principle, like we have given you reasons why their principle is relying on this consent being meaningful, and we have told you why like consent is never meaningful for two like systemic reasons, right? First, we have told you that at a point at which you consent to making a video, you don't have the ability to revoke that video in the future, which means that one metric we recognize for consent of revocability is not there, so this consent can never be meaningful. And second, we told you like consent is only meaningful at a point at which you have full information to what you're consenting, and this production house will have systemic reasons to not tell you what you're consenting to, and they'll probably push you towards more riskier and riskier content in the future, and you can never meaningfully consent to that experience, which means that their principle, which relies on consent, never really achieves its outcome, because they have proven to you why this consent is never meaningful, and they don't have responses to it. But I think even at our worst case, right, even if you are taking like some sort of choice from people to get into this industry, I think we tell you why there is enough third-party harm from the like in terms of some people not being able to make this choice for you to restrict this choice of individuals, or in terms of like not consenting or consenting or whatever in this like in this debate, right? We tell you why there is third-party harm to people who consume this content, and why there's third-party harm to like future people who are likely to get into this industry as well. Two bits of weighing then on principle. First bit of weighing is just on the extent of proof provided by both teams in this debate, right? First, I think there is just no response from them to whatever we tell you from the first speech in terms of in terms of why the principle isn't valid. But I think second, I still don't know at the end of like third affirmative why their principle works in real life, and how it outweighs like the other harms we are talking about in this debate, right? I think on a comparatively, just on extent of proof, we have given you enough reasons to believe that consent is untrue mostly, and why third party harm in this debate is significant enough for you to not care about it. But I think the second bit of weighing on principle is just on depth of impact. I think the AF claim on principle is simple, is that like when you don't make the conversation around consent, probably a lot of people who consent can't really have a part in that conversation. On a comparative, our claim is that look, like you cannot really meaningfully consent. But even at like our worst and their best, even if there are only a few people who do not consent in this industry and majority of people do consent, we tell you that the harm an individual faces of like not consenting but still being forced to work is just more irreversible and more deep in nature, in terms of that harm is never something which can be compensated for in the future. On a comparative, the majority of individuals who still consent can just voice out their consent in other platforms and rather get better working conditions, because for them like the world looks the same, right? So I think the conclusion then is just that we prevent more deeper harms to individuals, and for all those reasons we are very proud to negate. Thank you.
Excellent. I'd like to thank the speaker, and now get to the reply stage, where we will flip the speaking order and halve the speaking times to 4 minutes. So I'd like to welcome up the negative reply speaker to conclude the case for the negative team.
You can hear me, right? Am I audible?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Start. Yeah. Starting in 3, 2, 1, go. I think the side on affirmative has a good case for why progressive discourse in general is good, but that doesn't win them the debate today, because the debate today was more nuanced. It was about how specifically progressive discourse, to the extent to which we all agree that it is good, should frame discourse around certain norms and how when they choose to defend them. proposition here, like side affirmative here, sadly, does not fulfill their burden of proving the benefits of framing the discourse in this way, which is why they lose the round, right? But I want to consider a few things in this reply speech, right? The first thing I want to just note is that I want to assume affirmative's best case, where individuals in these sorts of industries, all individuals do end up consenting, and prove to you as to why still you shouldn't frame the discourse in this way, right? I think there are two reasons why you should side with negative here, right? First is that I think even if all individuals do consent, side affirmative loses on the trade-off that we posit right in our first speech, which is that to the extent to which there are some vulnerable individuals within these industries who don't get good living conditions, who are often exploited under the guise of consent, etc. These are individuals who often you should care about, because they don't have any other ability to voice out their concerns with regards to how they're not getting pay or benefits, and they're being exploited, which is why on the metric of vulnerability they're losing the trade-off, right? But secondly, to the extent to which the metric they stand behind is consent, we're better able to support this sort of consent, because if you buy all the impacts we give you across 3 speeches, we improve the material conditions of these individuals, which means that the thing you are consenting to is like you have more things to consent to. You just don't need to consent to, like, I don't know, like a $1 minimum, like a $2 minimum wage or whatever. You can consent to a higher minimum wage. So we definitely improve the consent if all of our impacts are true, right? But secondly, I just want to consider the more likely scenario in the debate. The more likely scenario in the debate isn't one where proposition has the fiat for assuming all like absolutely perfect consent, but it's one where they were supposed to prove as to why you have mechanisms to ensure that the consent is perfect, right? Which means that the more realistic scenario in the debate is one where consent is probably perfect for some actors within the industry, but not so much for a lot of other actors within the industry. In that comparison, I think there are 2 reasons why side affirmative loses the round, right? The first, that they lose on their own metric of respecting choices, because to the extent to which they don't do the legwork of proving why this consent was fair in the first place, you can't respect a consent. It was forcibly taken, which means they lose on their own metric, right? But 2, right, to the extent to which like their response to this on third affirmative was to say we can flag instances of forcible consent. Like you literally like cannot do that, because they will be seen as bad apples or isolated incidents in an industry where most individuals do end up consenting. So on a scale of how much visibility you're able to get for instances of forcible consent, you get much lesser time on their side of the house, which is why these things aren't meaningful, right? And then the reason why you should side with side negative on this clash is that we have much clearer mechanisms, which is to the extent to which like individuals don't get good consent, like perfect consent within the industry, we have better mechanisms of how we change that, right? I think we clearly show you as to why your ability to leave is much better, because people can't weaponize your consent against you and say that, oh, but you consented at that point in time. What's the issue now? Why do you not want the video now? All these sorts of like vitriolic rhetoric that can exist, right? But secondly, I think we're the only side that gives you like organic incentives for why firms which don't take your consent and give you bad living conditions are automatically rooted out of the industry, in terms of having lower collaborations with them, in terms of in terms of how like they have an incentive to do better, because otherwise they'll face call out, etc. None of these mechanisms exist on their side. They asymmetrically exist on our side, which is why we win the more realistic scenario in the round. But in our absolute worst case, right, where I think there are some individuals whose consent is forcibly taken, but they aren't given enough media time because we don't frame the discourse around that way, right? 2 responses to why we still win the debate there, right? One, which is that I think to the extent to which these individuals are unable to escape the conditions of these industries on either side of the house, we at least provide them better benefits in terms of getting a better wage. These things are important because you can do more with the money that you have, and you can better improve your agency by purchasing things that you want or investing in things that you actually like, which means you're better able to improve on agency anyway, right? But secondly, I think to the extent to which a proposition wants to claim a comparative benefit on this, which is with regards to how some people aren't getting like consent properly, we still win on that because they never prove to you as to why this consent can be better, right? At the end of the day, the impacts we prove to you are much clearer in the debate, which is why you should negate it.
Excellent. I'd like to thank the speaker and welcome the final speaker in the debate for the affirmative reply.
Am I audible? Hello.
Yeah.
Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. First of all, honorable judge, let me say that this whole debate was not only in the pornography industry. This whole debate was all about societal change, political change, and political protests, etc. Now, what the opposition team did, they showed us that their main standing point was that if you are in pornography industry, then you cannot get out, or you cannot forget your past life just because your videos will be online, people will recognize you, and etc. So we said that if you are getting into pornography industry, you already know that what kind of life you are going to lead. So when you are giving your consent, still knowing these types of scenario will be happening to you, then we are no one to talk about it. Secondly, there are lots of porn stars who got out from this industry and also doing well in their lives, such as Sunny Leon or Mia Khalifa, etc. They already got out from that life and leading a better life for themselves. And also, they don't mind that they were porn stars and all. They are rather they're proud of it. Such as there was a porn star called Sana Khan who got out from this porn industry and already living a religious life. So the fact is whenever you are getting into these types of industries, you are giving your consents, and also you know what kind of life you will have to lead in future, and still you are giving consent, and you are totally cool with it. And you are totally cool with it after you are getting out of that industry. So the thing is actually depends on the whole consent scenario. And the thing is, the opposition party just talked about the pornography industry, which messed up the whole debate, to be honest, because this debate was not only on this on the basis of this industry, rather it was they had to talk about like political changes, cultural changes, religious changes, and etc. And also they had to talk about the revolutions happening into the whole world, such as Me Too movement, as we have talked about. Also, we are also talking about tiger parenting nowadays, which was really discouraged back in the past. So the thing is, when we are talking about something going out of the culture of our society, then we're creating a revolution, to be honest, and that's what we were talking about. And by these progressive discourses, you can like we talked about that you can ensure proper human rights. You can be more civilized, and also you can reduce discrimination, and also you can maintain a societal balance, which gives you a peaceful environment and a peaceful world. And also, if you want to like make the world livable, and also if you want to make the world better for humans, then you have to support this trend of progressive discourses, because even if the progressive discourses when a progressive discourse is unable to change a society, it arises some vital questions which helps us to improve ourselves, to improve our society, and also improve improve the whole scenario of our society, and can bring peace to the entire world. Thank you so much.
Excellent. I'd like to thank both teams for the debate. Now, I think what will happen now is if you can eventually leave the room, but before you